It made no sense to risk a shutdown and to risk handing that much power to President Trump for a weak-ass 30-day CR. But the thing is that it didn't have to make sense because the whole fight was fake. The House Democrats were gone. They were at a resort. And even though that resort was only 30 miles away, they did not return on that Friday to even pretend to want to vote on a 30-day CR that they said they were fighting for. It was all a performance. Because the only way House Democrats could be confident enough to keep their resort reservations and be physically away from the Capitol on Friday, March 14th, is if they knew the whole time that the CR that passed the House on March 11th would become law that Friday. If they knew that some Democratic senators would break the filibuster and let it happen.
I am so damn tired of being lied to. I don't think I can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies, but I'm not gonna buy it anymore.
Hello, my friend, and thank you for listening to the 313th episode of Congressional Dish. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. And today I'm going to tell you what's in the funding bill that passed on March 14th and that funds the government until September 30th. Because there were a lot of scary things being said about this funding bill, specifically by Democrats who branded it as a slush fund and a power grab by the Republicans. And so, to see for myself and for you, I went through this funding law line by line and compared the funding levels that were changed to see what exactly was done in this new law. But before I even got to the line-by-line tedious funding analysis, it was already clear to me that this funding law was not like some of the other Republican funding laws that we've seen in the past. And that will be clear to longtime listeners because today, I will not be telling you about all of the evil dingleberries that got attached and then hitchhiked their way into law, because I'll tell you right now, there simply weren't any. Even before I got to the funding analysis, it was clear to me that the Democrats' branding of this law were wrong. And so I do think this will be a comforting episode for anyone who thinks, because you were told, that something horrible just became law. In fact, after I tell you the details of the law, I'm going to tell you a story that, for now, has a happy ending. Because we just dodged a big bullet. We being those of us who value having a functional government. But this bullet was dodged when a group of Senate Democrats decided to vote with Republicans to allow the passage of this funding bill before our government was able to shut down. Those Senate Democrats are being blasted by most of the other Democrats and a lot of people in person and online. But today I'm going to tell you why that outrage is unwarranted and was the result of shameless political theater. And I think you can already tell that this episode won't be like most public Congressional Dish episodes. I am taking an editorial position on this one, and I will mince no words. This episode will be more opinion-y than usual, but as usual, my opinion is educated, and you can find my sources in this episode's show notes should you doubt anything I say. But since I will be sharing my opinion today, here's the bias that shapes my perspective. We are now 2 months into the new Trump administration, and I think these truths have been proven obvious. Number 1, President Trump is using powers of the executive branch in ways that are illegal, which we know because courts have already ruled this to be true in, I don't even know how many cases, but I can think of at least 4 off the top of my head. First, the courts shot down Trump's attempt to end birthright citizenship rights, which are guaranteed in the Constitution itself and can't be ended via executive order. This is because an executive order is a document that allows the president to instruct law enforcement agencies how to enforce a law. Executive orders aren't supposed to create new law, and they certainly don't trump the Constitution. And by the way, executive orders can be deleted by the next president. And so everything Donald Trump is doing with executive orders can be undone as long as we make sure that he leaves office at the end of his second term, as the Constitution demands, on January 20th, 2029. But courts have also ruled that Trump can't kick transgender people out of the military because of what appears to me to be pure bigotry. The courts ruled that there's no fact-based reason to kick transgender people out of the military because they are causing no known problems, and it's clearly discriminatory. And all I can think about when I think about this is Squid Game. Like, I want that chick from Squid Game leading my gun-toting squad in case of emergency, and I don't care what her genitals looked like at birth. And then, of course, the courts have repeatedly ruled against the actions of DOGE, or the Department of Government Efficiency, which is not a department in our federal government. And that is not a semantic distinction. Departments are like parent companies of agencies. And so the word department in a federal name has structural importance, and it's deceptive to name it a department when it is not. Because calling it a department implies a level of power that DOGE simply does not have. And this is because DOGE is actually just a renamed agency. Until 2 months ago, DOGE was called the Digital Services Agency. In fact, I just saw for myself that DOGE is still legally in funding laws called the Digital Services Agency, which was created only about a decade ago in 2014 by President Obama to help with tech stuff. The Digital Services Agency, DOGE's maiden name, was itself created with an executive order to provide tech support when the healthcare.gov exchanges weren't working properly. And so legally, DOGE is simply super aggressive tech support. It's like the Geek Squad gone power hungry. But let's just take a beat here to marinate on the fact that the DOGE Geek Squad is only legally authorized to exist via executive order. I really want you to understand how legally irrelevant DOGE is. Because in the executive branch hierarchy, the top is the White House, and the executive office of the president is basically its own department. Underneath that, there are a bunch of offices. So there's like the White House office and the office of the vice president and the office of policy development and the office of management and budget. And so those are like the agency levels. And underneath the office of management and budget is where DOGE lives. So it's not exactly correct to even call it an agency if we're talking hierarchy of power. DOGE is like a sub-agency of the Office of Management and Budget, and Congress never created it, authorized it, or funded it. Everything it gets, it's gotten through executive order or the Office of Management and Budget. And so DOGE is not high on the totem pole of power. And DOGE is being treated with far more respect and fear than it deserves. But regardless of the legality of it for now, I think we can safely conclude that intentions have become clear. President Trump is using the powers of the executive branch in ways that are illegal, and DOGE is the poster child of that truth. And then 2, President Trump is dismantling parts of the federal government in ways legal and illegal and has promised to continue. The Office of Management and Budget and its child DOGE have attempted to fire people in multiple departments and agencies that they have no power over. So, for example, they sent a deferred resignation proposal to pretty much all federal employees, an offer that they had no right and no funding available to make. And that got stomped on by the courts. They also ordered agencies to lay off all probationary employees, which amounts to hundreds of thousands of people who are either newly hired or recently promoted, which the Office of Management and Budget and DOGE, again, had no right to do. And these firings are being reversed by the courts, and many thousands of people are being rehired as I speak. But regardless of the courts, the intention is clear. They are trying to dismantle large parts of our government because the size of their attempted downsizings would have rendered many agencies incapable of functioning. And so as I sit here and I search for the best case scenario, a big picture goal is taking shape in my eyes. For me, when I choose what to root for, and when I analyze what actions are good and what actions are bad, I want to prioritize keeping as much of the federal government functional as possible. That's my goal. Because it's much harder to rebuild something than it is to break it. And I value the United States government and don't ever want to see it irreparably broken. I value the departments and regulations that protect me from poisons in my food, air, and water. I value the departments and regulations that protect our people and territories from other humans who want to hurt us. I value the departments and regulations that make it possible to physically move between cities and states and other countries. I value the physical infrastructure they build and the safety system that coordinates it all. And I value the branch and department that plays referee to all of this. I value the judicial branch and I value the Justice Department. And I value striving to ensure that those parts of our government are politically neutral. But somehow, at least since Ronald Reagan was president, it has somehow become cool. Like if you're someone who doesn't know much about government but wants to sound cool in conversations about it, it's become cool to just shit on the government and make that your entire political persona. And government's an easy target, since government is the police, and government is big, and sometimes its services are structured poorly, and it can operate slowly and be frustrating. I get that. But we've been through shutdowns in the recent past, and so we've already proven to ourselves, and recently, that we do in fact miss our government when it's gone. And so my goal for the next 4 years is to do something to play a part in minimizing the damage the Trump administration does to our government, in the hopes that the Trump era will end on January 20th, 2029, and then we can get to work rebuilding a government that we can be proud of. And freeloaders, I gotta tell you, I can already see history repeating itself today as far as this podcast's finances are concerned. And so let's just put the cards on the table here. Because MAGA Republicans figured out that I'm not on their team a while ago. Although I've also been very public in my opinion that the MAGA community is fun to be around. There's no hate here, but I'm not wearing a red hat. And so there has been an exodus of MAGA from the paying audience, which I can see in the Patreon exit surveys accusing me of Trump derangement syndrome. Which, okay, bye. Because I went to their convention, the Republican National Convention, and I know what a significant percentage of MAGA voters are. They're good people, like most people are, but these are people who picked a team. They're on Team Red, Team Republican, Team Trump, and they don't really care what he does. If their team does it, it's a win, and they're just counting wins. Because it's clearly not about policy. Republicans for years bleated free market, free enterprise on command, and now support random tariffs against our allies. MAGA Republicans also said they wanted to minimize our foreign wars, but are now all for taking over Greenland and bombing the shit out of Yemen and making Canada the 51st state, and they want to take at least half of Palestine. And none of that is going to happen without violence. And Republicans are also people who shouted, "Support the troops!" at anyone and everyone opposed to the W. Bush wars, but are now fine with the Trump administration, possibly illegally, firing more veterans in 60 days than any president has in my lifetime for sure. There is a significant number of die-hard Republicans who stand for nothing other than being Team Republican. They picked a team, and they'll defend it regardless. And I have no respect at all for that approach to government, and so it makes perfect sense to me that they wouldn't be able to handle this show. And so, bye-bye. But there's a strand of Democrat that behaves the exact same way. And this is what happened during the first Trump administration. At first, they supported this show, because with Republicans in control of both branches of Congress and the White House, many of my episodes focused on the truly disgusting deeds of the Republicans, like when they tried to free the health insurance companies from most regulations so that those companies could be freer to financially fuck us when we get sick, even more so than they already are. But then I also had to produce episodes like both Trump impeachment episodes, where I was left with no choice but to say, because it was the damn truth, that I would have voted to acquit Trump both times. The first time I had to acquit him because the Democrats just simply didn't prove what they said Trump did on that phone call with Ukraine's President Zelensky. And if you want a refresher on that whole debacle, episode 206, it's called Impeachment, the Evidence. Listen to that. But then the second impeachment, I also had to acquit him because the Democrats impeached first and investigated second. And so the impeachment focused only on the January 6th riot, because the Democrats didn't have time to really know the extent of Trump's document fraud. They didn't really know about Team Trump's creation of 7 fake election certifications in 7 states, and Team Trump's intentions when they turned them in to be used in the official vote count. Democrats impeached so fast that they didn't even know the facts about that, and so they impeached solely on the January 6th bumpkin riot, and they didn't make the case that Donald Trump was some kind of wizard who controlled the minds of the morons who stormed the Capitol that day. The Democrats chose to impeach first and investigate second, and now Donald Trump is president again, which I take no pleasure in at all. I wanted Donald Trump impeached and removed from office and prohibited from ever running for a position of power again. He deserved it after faking those election documents, turning them in, and attempting to steal the election from President Biden. And I hated having to say that I would acquit him, not because he's an innocent man, because he's not, but because the Democrats were that incompetent. And after those episodes, which to Democratic partisan ears sounded like a defense of Donald Trump, my income took a nosedive. And I think it's about to happen again, because the Democrats, I'll tell you, I have very few kind things to say about the majority of them today. And based on what I've seen online, I am not going to be taking a popular stance here today. And so once again, I am about to break some partisan brains, and after 12 years, I know I'm about to be punished. This show depends on people who are serious about good governance, not loyalty to political teams. This show depends on people who care about policy and want to know what government is doing, and who are mature enough to handle criticism of stupid, reckless political performances, regardless of who's on the stage. It depends, quite frankly, on people like you, if you're still listening. And so my question to you is, does that describe you? Do you want this podcast to exist during these times? Do you value my terrible business decisions that lead me to refuse to treat you like a child? Because if that describes you, if you really are the adult in the room, I need your support now more than ever, because this show has been through the Trump years before, and independence does not pay in times of extreme partisanship. I mean, already you can see the success of the partisans as their shows rise through the charts, with the Medea's Touch podcast, which is a podcast for Team Blue, now being downloaded more often than Joe Rogan. The easy road to success in podcasting right now is through partisanship. But I won't fucking do it. You deserve better, you beautiful, independent-minded American. And so I'm going to be telling you the truth, even if it drives me straight back to clipping coupons for the grocery outlet and skipping guacamole for financial reasons. But please don't send me back there for telling you the truth. What I'm asking you to do is to please support this show. With money, if that wasn't clear. And if you do so on Patreon, you do get bonus episodes every week in which I will tell you what happened last week in Congress. But I love and mentally need your Venmos. Those Venmo dings and messages help me a lot by making me happy when I get them. But I also appreciate the PayPals and the checks and the Zells and the gift cards, and everything you send in is appreciated to the point of keeping this project going for 12 years and counting. Also appreciated are your marketing efforts. And so if you have people in your life that aren't brain-dead partisan sheep, please hook them onto Congressional Dish too. We need as many people aware of what's happening in our government as we can get without partisan bullshittery clouding their view. But I'm busy analyzing legislation line by line, and so I need you to help this community grow. And thank you if you've been hard at work on the marketing team. And welcome to the show if this is your first time. And so if you want to join Patreon or pay any other way, you can visit this episode's show notes or congressionaldish.com. And at the very least, thanks for listening and sharing the show. Okay. My goal for the next 4 years is to do something, in my case, create Congressional Dish, with the aim of helping minimize the damage the Trump administration does to our government. And that goal is what shapes my feelings towards the passage of the continuing resolution on March 14th, which will fund the government until September 30th, the end of fiscal year 2025. And what a continuing resolution does, what this funding bill does, is it continues the funding levels from the previous year. And in general, a continuing resolution that makes no adjustments at all is considered a funding cut because it doesn't increase budgets along with inflation. Our agencies and departments also hate continuing resolutions because it doesn't allow them to start any new projects, which doesn't allow for flexibility, and that is hated especially by our military. But this particular continuing resolution continues budget levels negotiated by a Republican House of Representatives, a Democratic Senate, and Democratic President Biden from 2024. But it does have some adjustments, which I'm going to detail for you in a little bit. But the passage of this continuing resolution, this is the key point, prevented a government shutdown. Now, we've been in these situations before with government shutdowns, and we've talked about the consequences a lot. So federal workers get furloughed, which means that they're either going home and not getting paid and hoping they get retro paid afterwards. There's also people that have to work but aren't getting paid in the time that they're working. So as a government shutdown gets longer and longer and the paychecks don't come in for people who have worked the whole time, this is when they start to get really pissed. And as they start to get really pissed, the services they provide get shittier. And it really seems like airports in particular get hit early and hard in these shutdown situations. And then things that we like end up having to close during the shutdown. So like national parks and museums. And I can tell you one thing about Americans. When our vacations get ruined, Americans really start to care about our government. And this is probably because our guaranteed vacation days are limited by companies in ways that citizens in other countries just don't tolerate. But our vacations are precious and don't with our vacations. But the shutdowns usually do. And our previous shutdown situations have never been won by the party who is insisting on the shutdown. So the most notable shutdowns that we've covered here on Congressional Dish were first the shutdown in 2013 from October 1st to 13th, and this was the Ted Cruz Obamacare shutdown, when the Republicans tried to attach dingleberries to funding bills that would sabotage the Affordable Care Act as a way to get around President Obama's veto pen. But Republicans, who were the ones who were attaching those dingleberries, received the public anger and backed down and got nothing. And then there was the longest shutdown in U.S. history, which happened from December 22nd to January 25th, 2019. And this was the Trump border wall shutdown. This was when President Trump refused to sign any funding bill that didn't include $5.7 billion for a southern border wall. At the time, the Democrats controlled the House and the Senate, and they refused to give him that money. But it was Trump who received the public anger, and so eventually he signed a funding law with no wall money. Again, the shutdown people got nothing. And the Democrats have always been the ones who have been winning this because they have been against the shutdowns. Now, this montage I am about to play for you, this was produced by the Trump White House using footage from the Democrats from those previous shutdowns. And because it was produced by the Trump people, I didn't add the music. But the point they were trying to make was well made. So in this montage, you're going to hear from Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer of New York, Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island, Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia, Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, Senator Adam Schiff of California, Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, and Senator Kristen Gillibrand of New York, and they'll bounce around a lot. But these are all Democrats, all currently in Congress. And these are all the things that they said that were correct in previous shutdown situations.
To hold these people hostage instead of just letting them do their jobs, which they want to do while we work out our differences, so wrong.
This is democracy. And in a democracy, hostage tactics are the last resort for those who can't win their fights through elections, can't win their fights in Congress, can't win their fights for the presidency, and can't win their fights in the courts.
A government shutdown of any duration would harm hardworking Americans and our economy.
Why should we ask TSA officers to go without their hard-earned pay while they protect our airports?
I'm a senator from Virginia. Some of the hardest effects of shutdown will be seen in my state.
If the government shuts down, it will be average Americans who suffer most.
Some who right now are trying to figure out how they're going to pay rent, how they're going to make mortgage payments, how they're going to keep college payments going, how they're going to keep the lights on, how they're going to keep food on the table.
Had the government shut down, hundreds of thousands of people would have not gotten their paychecks. Federal employees would have been furloughed, sent home.
Our military won't get paid. Head Start teachers won't get paid, our wildfire fighters won't get paid, federal prison guards won't get paid.
A government shutdown means seniors who rely on Social Security could be thrown into chaos. Our veterans could see regional VA offices shut down and support services put on hold.
Shutdowns are not good for the economy.
Shutdowns cost taxpayers billions of dollars per week.
Shutdowns cost the economy billions of dollars.
They cost businesses money. They could even cause a downgrade to the nation's credit rating.
Families who benefit from WIC and other nutrition programs could see benefits halted.
If this shutdown continues indefinitely, 39 million Americans will risk not having enough food. They will lose their SNAP benefits in February. So that means American children will be going to bed hungry. It's unacceptable.
The longer that this shutdown goes on, the more Americans that will be affected.
Critical services and our economy are being threatened with poison pill partisanship. Shutting down the government should not be a negotiating tactic.
Hostage taking is all they have left, a last gasp of those who cannot cope with the realities of our democracy.
And with those arguments, Democrats have won every shutdown battle. And the consequences of a shutdown would be significantly worse if the government were to shut down at this particular moment in time. A shutdown during this Congress is extremely likely to be very different than the ones we've been through in the past. So let's look at what has happened recently with government funding to see how we even got here. Because it all started with failure. The 118th Congress failed, as every Congress has since 1996, to finish the 12 required government funding bills on time. Because you see, the way it's supposed to work is that 12 appropriations, which are funding committees, in the House are supposed to carefully craft a funding bill for the department that they're in charge of funding. Then that bill is supposed to pass the House and the Senate in identical form and then go to the president to be signed into law. Now, obviously, that might require some back and forth if there are amendments, but that's okay because they have 9 months to get this work done, and it was due on September 30th, 2024. But the previous Congress failed entirely. They didn't finish a single one of the 12 bills, and so a continuing resolution was necessary to keep the government functional while they finished their homework. And so on September 30th, they passed the first CR extending the 2024 funding. But because of a group of 20 Republicans who have been a pain in the ass for the last few Republican speakers, when you look at who these people are, they can roughly be characterized as the Tea Party or House Freedom Caucus or the MAGA wing of the party. And I read former Speaker John Boehner's book, and he absolutely hates these people, which was pretty fun to hear him say in his own voice. But that group refused to vote for any CR, to the point that in the first year of the 118th Congress, in September/October of 2023, a CR battle resulted in Speaker Kevin McCarthy losing his speaker job, after which he resigned from Congress entirely like a cranky little bitch. Because who cares about the district who voted for me if I don't get to be speaker? But that is how the current Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, got his promotion. It was all because of a CR battle. And that same group of Republicans have been a pain in his ass, too. You know, this is the shit he's had to deal with every time congressional failure has been remedied with a CR. So this was a montage that we made for episode 282 called Chaos Fires McCarthy. So if you want to know how that all went down, I documented it in that episode. But in this following group of clips, you're going to hear from Representative Matt Gaetz. He was the ringleader of that effort to fire McCarthy, and he's not in Congress anymore. But the other people you're going to hear from are, so you're going to hear from Tim Burchett of Tennessee, then we'll go back to Gaetz for a second, then Lauren Boebert of Colorado, and then back to Tim Burchett.
No continuing resolutions. Individual spending bills are bust.
We do not need a continued resolution. We don't need to play any more games. We just need clean bills with real cuts to get our country back on track.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not voting for a continuing resolution. I'm not voting to continue the failure and the waste and the corruption and the election interference.
We don't want continuing resolutions or omnibus bills. We want to go through the funding of the federal government bill by bill.
with these continued resolutions, and they tell us to pass a continued resolution so we won't have to pass another continued resolution. Well, that line of thinking is like telling a crackhead that I'm going to give you more crack to get you off of crack.
And so, because of that group, Speaker Mike Johnson needed some Democrats to vote for the September CR that kept the government operational. And so that one was crafted in a bipartisan way. In fact, more Democrats voted for it than Republicans. In the House, all Democrats voted for it, along with 132 Republicans. There were 82 Republicans who voted no. But 81% of the House of Representatives total voted for that CR, and it was the same story the next day in the Senate. Every Democrat voted yes, and Republicans were split. But it also passed with exactly 81% of the Senate voting yes. And President Biden signed the CR that funded the government until December 20th into law. And then Congress failed to finish their homework again, due to totally not trying. The election had happened at this point, and the Republicans knew that if they kicked the deadline into 2025, they would have full control of Congress and President Trump would be in the White House. And so they kicked the deadline. But once again, that pain-in-the-ass group of Republicans wouldn't support a CR, and so Speaker Mike Johnson had to work with Democrats. And the December CR did not get passed as easily as the September one. I produced a whole episode about it because it was so chaotic. But just as a quick refresher, 4 days before the funding deadline, Speaker Johnson and the Democrats unveiled their compromise bill, which was 1,547 pages. Now, for context, to really understand the CR that I analyzed for this episode, it took me 2 full workdays to go back and forth and compare the bill to current law levels. So I was checking the funding for 2024, seeing if it was different from 2025, and also checking to see if there were rescissions. So as I go through these numbers for you in a second, there are a lot of times when you will see a number being crossed out and replaced, but sometimes it is a rescission, which is kind of the opposite of what you would think it is because it is giving back funding. There was actually quite a bit of it in that CR, so you really had to tear it apart to understand what was going on. And so, like I said, this CR took me 2 days to fully understand it, and it was 39 pages. And so no one can fully analyze 1,547 pages in 4 days. But even at 1,547 pages, it was obvious just by glancing at it that it was packed full of dingleberries attempting to hitchhike their way into law. A lot of them Democratic Party dingleberries that they were trying to get in before the Democrats knew that they would lose control of everything. And honestly, some of those dingleberries I really liked. Not all dingleberries are bad, even though the dingleberry method itself I consider very dirty. But this was the saga where we got our first glimpse of life with Elon Musk in politics, because he took to the platform formerly known as Twitter and told a flurry of lies about the CR, which spooked the Republicans in Congress, and that effectively killed the CR. Now, it turns out that there was a provision in the CR that would have banned some projects in outer space, which would have hurt Elon Musk's business, SpaceX, and I suspect that may have been a motivation for his activism against the bill. But regardless, with the first 1,547-page CR dead, a new one was whipped up that was 120 pages, and that one passed at the last minute with huge bipartisan majorities in the House and Senate, with those same troublemakers in the Republican Party voting no. And that CR funded our government until March 14th. And so here we are in mid-March, and once again, Congress, this time a fully Republican-controlled Congress, failed to pass even a single appropriations bill into law. We are still at 0 out of 12. And so another CR is needed. And right now, there is no other funding alternative. And this time, the Republicans are acknowledging that they have no intention of properly funding the government with 12 carefully crafted bills for 2025. They are just giving up and taking the F on the funding assignment. And so the new CR funds the government at 2024 levels until the end of fiscal year 2025, which is September 30th. But politically, this latest CR didn't fit the pattern that was established in the 118th Congress. This CR, which was introduced on March 10th, 4 days before the shutdown, was written entirely by Republicans. Because in 2023 and 2024, the Democrats were able to get things they wanted into the CR because Mike Johnson had to negotiate with them. But this time, the troublemakers got in line. This time, House Speaker Mike Johnson knew that all of the Republicans in the House, except for one, Tom Massey of Kentucky, intended to vote for the CR. This meant that the Democrats had no leverage. They had none. And not a single Democratic vote was needed in the House to pass the CR. And so now, let's look at the CR that the Republicans wrote. First, and I think this is important, there are no poison pill dingleberries in this CR. In the past, as you heard, Republicans and Democrats have used these must-sign funding bills to get priorities that are not funding to hitchhike their way into law. In the past, Republicans tried to defund our health insurance regulators via dingleberries. They tried to give Trump billions for a wasteful border wall in the middle of nowhere via dingleberries. But this time, none of that. The bill was pure funding. And as for that funding, for everything that's not adjusted, the continuing resolution maintains the funding that was negotiated in 2024 between a Republican House, Democrats in the Senate, and a Democratic President Biden until September 30th, 2025. And I cannot emphasize that enough. Democrats didn't get to negotiate this specific text in this specific CR, but what matters is the funding and the policy. And their influence and President Biden's influence is all over it. The vast majority of the funding levels are levels that were funded in 2024 with their participation. And yet, here's what they told the public. Here's Senator Patty Murray on the Senate floor. She is the top Democrat on the Senate Appropriations Committee.
Please let's remember, Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the White House. If you refuse to put forward an offer that includes any Democratic input, you don't get Democratic votes. That's on Republicans. If you don't get any input from Democrats, it's a Republican vote. A shutdown is on Republicans.
That is so disingenuous. Because what matters here? The text of the CR or the funding levels? Democrats had enormous influence over the funding levels. And she, of all people, as the top Democrat on the Appropriations Committee, she knows it. Most of the funding was done via a bipartisan negotiation last year. The differences are in the adjustments, and the CR did have about 40 pages of adjustments. Now, that's not even close to adjusting the entire government's funding levels. Most, like I said, this is important, are kept at 2024 levels. But it's also not nothing. And those adjustments are what the Democrats are pissed about. And so I took some notes. And so here are some things that jumped out at me that I personally hate. In the Agriculture, Rural Development, and Food and Drug Administration section, they cut over 50%, which is over $20 million cut, to watershed and flood prevention operations. Because I guess if you don't believe in climate change, you don't need to prepare for it. Also, in the Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies Department, they put a permanent rescission, so they took away $10 million from violence against women prevention and prosecution programs. They also cut 37%, which is over $247 million, from community policing services, which includes mental health services and de-escalation training for law enforcement officers. So maybe remember that next time that you hear that a mass shooting is due to mental health, because they cut a lot of those programs. They also put $250 million back into the Assets Forfeiture Fund, which is basically where they steal our cash. It's a legit slush fund. And they increased funding for federal prisoner detention by $136 million, but that shouldn't be a surprise. In the Defense Department, they cut almost 30%, more than $316 million from our Chemical Agents and Munitions Destruction Program, and eliminated a guarantee that more than $57 million be spent on the Chemical Stockpile Emergency Preparedness Program. What could go wrong? They also increased funding for Counter-ISIS Train and Equip Fund by over $130 million. That's a 33% increase. And another part of the bill increases funding for logistics, military, and stability operations to counter ISIS by more than 300%, which is more than $35 million, which just kind of tells me that Congress at least intends to start more heavily bombing the Middle East. They also increased funding for missile procurement for the Army by $1.376 billion, which is a 30% increase. And just in general, war funding went up, which also should not be surprising in a Republican bill. They also, in the Energy and Water Development Department, did not extend the authority to use whatever is left of $1.85 billion for the Army Corps of Engineers for, quote, the construction of river and harbor, flood and storm damage reduction, shore protection, and aquatic ecosystem restoration, unquote. So just another way we're not preparing for the changes that are coming with our weather. And they canceled at least $300 million for small nuclear modular reactor projects, which I personally don't care about, but I know a lot of you guys do. In the Department of Homeland Security, the Republicans rescinded about $100,000 from the Office of the Inspector General. And with all the crazy things happening in the Department of Homeland Security, I really wish that cop was on the beat. They also rescinded about $15 million from the TSA operations, which I actually think the TSA has been doing pretty well lately. But when they get funding cuts, they have staffing cuts. And so that leads to longer lines for us. They also rescinded $2.5 million from U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services operations and support. And so that's the department that helps people figure out our immigration and rules in a time when I don't think anyone knows what our rules are. And then they also rescinded $1 million from Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction Offices operations and support. So once again, what could go wrong? In the Department of Labor, Health and Human Services, and I think this is one of the worst, they cut $280 million, which is a 69% cut, from activities of the National Institutes of Health Innovation account, which funds personalized medical treatments, brain research, cancer research, and stem cell research. And I think the stem cell part is what drew the ire of Republicans. Over in Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development, they cut over $206 million, that's 82%, for transit infrastructure grants, which are mainly for zero and low emission ferry boats and buses, and also for some transportation earmarks. And speaking of earmarks, this CR stops the extension of funding for all earmarks, which are pet projects inserted by members of Congress. Now, in general, Democrats, when they're allowed to insert these, insert more earmarks than Republicans. And in fact, inserting earmarks at all wasn't allowed for most of the life of Congressional Dish for a full decade, from 2011 to 2021, because then Republican Speaker of the House John Boehner banned them. But in 2021, when Democrats had control of the House Appropriations Committee Chair Rosa DeLauro brought earmarks back, followed quickly thereafter by the Democrats in the Senate. And so essentially, now that Republicans have full control of Congress again, they are eliminating earmarks in 2025, going back to the status quo that we had just 4 years ago. And so this effectively stops funding for 7,000 to 8,000 projects, which, if extended, would have cost approximately $15 billion per year. But I don't know about those numbers because these are individual projects. And so if those projects got what they needed and acted fast enough to use the money in 2024, this might not be a problem, and I have no way to know. But like I said, Democrats are the lovers of earmarks, and so I think the elimination of them, out of everything I saw in the CR, I think this is what likely pissed them off the most. But I also have a list of things that I liked in the CR. So back to the Agriculture, Rural Development, and Food and Drug Administration Department, they increased funding for WIC, which is Food for Women, Infants, and Children, by $567 million. Over in Financial Services and General Government, they reduced the rescission, so basically gave back $13 million for family courts and public defenders in Washington, D.C. They also canceled about $2 billion in rescission, so gave $2 billion back to the Emergency Connectivity Fund, which was designed to help schools and libraries provide internet to students during the COVID pandemic. They also increased the Small Business Administration's disaster loans program by more than double, which was an increase of $231 million. Over in the Department of Homeland Security, and this has gotten some attention, they retracted a rescission of over $728 million from the Department of Homeland Security. So that does give money back, quite a bit of it, to immigrations and customs, some agencies we're having some issues with. But it wasn't just for them. This money also goes to the Coast Guard and the Secret Service and FEMA and the Countering WMD's office and the Inspector General. The Department of Homeland Security has 22 different agencies. And so it went to all of those agencies. Also, with the Department of Homeland Security, they increased FEMA disaster relief by more than $2 billion. In the Department of Interior, Environment, and Related Agencies, the Republicans retracted, so gave back, a $18.5 million previous cut for construction in national parks, and they replaced $9 million for equipment replacement. They also gave back a rescission of $89 million from the National Park Service Land and Water Conservation Fund, and just in general, they slightly increased funding for operations at national parks. They also retracted a $90 million rescission from the Indian Health Services. They increased funding for wildland fire management by more than $144 million, and they provided premium pay for wildland firefighters for up to $9,000 extra per year. And then finally, they increased funding for EPA environmental programs and management by $17 million. It's not a lot, but it is an increase for the EPA. Definitely didn't see that coming. Over in the Department of Labor, Health, and Human Services, they retracted a $70 million rescission for payments to help states with children and family services programs. So they basically gave those children and family services programs a $70 million increase. And they did the same thing. This one, I checked this one 5 times, but they retracted a rescission worth $4.1 billion. So basically reauthorized $4.1 billion for COVID-19 expenses, including CDC vaccine activities, COVID-19 testing and mitigation, COVID-19 sequencing and surveillance, global health programs, and emergency medical supplies. And then finally, they funded the Department of Education with the exception of $202 million in earmarks. But they funded the Department of Education. And then over in military construction and veterans affairs, they did cut quite a bit from military construction, but they gave a lot to the veterans. So they retracted over $7.2 billion in rescissions to veterans' medical services, medical community care, and medical support and compliance. They retracted almost $2 billion in rescissions from the Veterans Health Administration. And then on top of that, added $4 billion for Veterans Health Services, added almost $14 billion to Veterans Community Care. And that makes sense that they would give more money to community care, which it's the Republicans' attempted privatization of the VA. So yeah, those numbers, they're in line with their priorities, but it's still money for veterans. They also added over $60 billion for veterans compensation and benefits, added over $10 billion for veterans readjustment benefits, and added $6 billion for the War Toxic Exposure Fund. Over in transportation, housing, and urban development, they retracted rescissions totaling over $1.5 billion taken from the Federal Aviation Administration. So they're basically giving $1.5 billion to the FAA. They also retracted rescissions totaling over $68 million from the Federal Highway Administration. They retracted a $65 million rescission for lead hazard reduction. They increased funding for FAA operations, safety activities, and air traffic controllers, thank God. And they increased funding for housing for the elderly, people with disabilities, and they increased rental assistance for Native Americans. And then finally, with mandatory programs, so we're talking Social Security, Medicare, food and nutrition programs. These are the ones that the Democrats keep saying the Republicans are taking a hatchet to. Well, not yet, because this law, appropriates, quote, amounts necessary to maintain program levels, unquote, so no cap on Social Security and Medicare. That is a protection of these programs at least until September 30th, 2025. They also appropriated over $261 billion, so that is like $250 billion, for grants to states for Medicaid for advance payments for the first quarter of fiscal year 2026. So that protects Medicaid in case the very likely thing happens and the government isn't properly funded by September 30th again this year. And that's not the only thing they planned in advance for. The CR also appropriates $1.6 billion for payments to states for child support enforcement and family support programs for the first quarter of fiscal year 2026. It appropriates $3.6 billion for payments to states for foster care for the first quarter of 2026. And it appropriates $22.1 billion for the Supplemental Security Income Program, which provides cash assistance to low-income individuals who are elderly, blind, or disabled for the first quarter of fiscal year 2026. And the most important thing, for me anyway, to love about the CR is what it doesn't do, which is that it doesn't legitimize DOJ. This CR does not authorize DOJ as a real agency or department, doesn't even talk about DOJ at all. It doesn't, therefore, authorize DOJ to have any power over funding or staffing of any other agency or department. And it funds every single department and agency that DOJ has attempted to illegally cut. The Department of Education, funded. USAID, funded. The U.S. Institute for Peace, funded. Funded, funded, funded. It's all funded. Which means that the ongoing court cases against the illegal cuts and firings by the illegitimate Doge are strengthened. Congress, with this CR, showed its intentions that those agencies be funded. Those are Congress's intentions, even after the attempted Doge cuts. And so if you're someone who wants Congress to do something to rein in Doge by doing nothing, congressional Republicans handed us a quiet win. Because it's not necessary to create legislation to remove the powers of the boogeyman. The boogeyman is already powerless because he only exists in your mind. Well, the same thing can be said about the powers of Doge. They are imaginary, and the congressional Republicans kept it that way. And this action matches some congressional gossip that I had solicited. And I won't tell you who told me this, and so believe me or don't. But about a month ago, because I got friends now on Capitol Hill, I asked a Republican buddy of mine in Congress if there were any signs that Republicans in Congress were going to stand up for Congress's authorities. And I was told that at that time, Senate Republicans were pretty much already done with the Doge bullshit. And sure enough, a few weeks ago, a group of Senate Republicans had a meeting with Elon Musk, during which they told him that his role is of an advisor to the departments, and that he has no authority, and told him that any cuts need to be made by Congress. And as for the House Republicans, I was told that House Republicans are concerned too, but are depending on the courts to shut all the Doge madness down. And so when I saw that the CR, written by those House Republicans, maintained the current illegitimate status of Doge, that sets the stage for the courts continuing to smack it down. And yet, here's what the top Democratic appropriator in the Senate told the public. Here's Senator Patty Murray of Washington.
And look, just because you are a Republican, and maybe you think you have an in with Elon's Doge squad, don't think that means your constituents are safe, because when your constituents are on the line, don't be surprised when Trump's rage at some mayor or governor who puts your state's interests ahead of the president's ego wins out over any sense of obligation to thank you for giving him all this power in the first place. Or when Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, stops making lame social media posts for long enough to hear you out. Don't be surprised when Musk values another $1 billion for one of his companies over the workers in your state he is firing left and right, or the programs that he is eliminating.
Not only did Elon Musk never have the power to do that, this CR doesn't give it to him. So for anti-Doge Democrats, this CR was a surprising win. And the only explanation for claiming otherwise, as Patty Murray and many other Democrats have done, would be if one were engaged in deceptive political theater. Because even the funding levels, as far as cuts are concerned, it cuts earmarks. There are cuts, but that's what happens when a party that runs on cutting government wins full control of Congress and the White House. But even with that much power, the cuts in this CR just simply aren't insane. And as you know, there are increases, and not just to military funding. In fact, overall, the Congressional Budget Office analysis of the CR so that it increased funding by about $7 billion overall, which is nothing in a $1.7 trillion budget. But the point is that this wasn't a slash and burn funding law. It wasn't what one would expect from a fully Republican-controlled Congress that's trying to help Trump destroy the government. Democrats be damned. Essentially, when I look at the full CR, I see this as a bill that was kind of designed as a compromise bill. This was designed to be something that at least some Democrats could vote for, because it maintains most of the funding levels negotiated by Democrats and signed by Biden, and it keeps Doge illegitimate. And the reason I think the Republicans did this, why they didn't use this as an opportunity to actually create a wrecking ball of a bill with all kinds of dingleberries attached, is because, one, they would be rightfully blamed for a shutdown if they went back to their old tricks. They tried that too many times, including during the last Trump administration, and they've always failed. But then two, Republicans also want to move on to their real goal, which is the budget reconciliation bill. That's the one bill that they can create truly without any Democratic Party influence whatsoever, because that bill can't be filibustered. That's where the big cuts to government, and that's where the cuts to taxes for the rich can be expected. That's the real fight, and the clock is ticking. Because before they can start working on the bill itself, the House Republicans and the Senate Republicans have to create an identical budget outline. It's just a required part of the process. And right now, both parts of Congress have passed a budget outline, but they are wildly different from one another. And so there's a lot of work to do, and they just don't have time to dick around. So it's like, why fight with the Democrats over this CR when they can just get this passed quickly and do whatever they want with the reconciliation bill without the spotlight on them that a shutdown would bring? And so the Republicans, just to get government funded and move on, created a funding bill that is not a partisan nightmare. It's a bill that, now that I know the details, I think Democrats could, maybe not support, but there's nothing in there that needed to be stopped. Consequences be damned. But most of the congressional Democrats, in their words anyway, treated this CR like it was some kind of nightmare bill that needed to be stopped. Here's the Democrat in the Senate who should know best what's actually in the CR, the top Democrat on the Appropriations Committee, Patty Murray.
This CR tells RFK Jr. exactly what Trump promised. Go wild on health care. You got a free pass from House Republicans to commandeer hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars and set them on fire, relitigating disproven theories about autism and sowing distrust about vaccines amid a measles outbreak that is killing children.
No, it doesn't. And that was just one of the many wild lies that were told by Democrats during their coordinated messaging campaign on March 14th. And so let's move over into the House. Here's the top Democrat in the House, Hakeem Jeffries, on March 14th in a press conference.
House Republicans then passed a partisan and reckless bill that cuts funding for health care, cuts funding for veterans, and cuts funding for nutritional assistance to children and families.
Lies. This CR funded Medicare at whatever level is needed. It was basically unlimited funding. It also pre-funds Medicaid for the first quarter of 2026 to make sure that it's funded in case of another funding crisis. And it increased funding for veterans. But I think one of the reasons he says that is that veterans and military construction are funded by the same section. And so in the CBO financial analysis, if you look at the totals by department and are not careful, the cuts to military construction projects look like a cut to veterans benefits. But Jeffries should know this. He should know better. And maybe he does. But either way, in his position, it's unacceptable to be telling the public details that are simply untrue. Because the CR also increased funding for WIC. It increased funding for food for women and children. There were just so many lies. And that was just a few seconds out of a 30-minute speech. There were more, but you get the idea. It seems like the Democrats decided to fight Donald Trump's pathological lying by becoming just like him. And as a result, right now, there are an enormous number of people on the blue side of the spectrum who are pissed that the government wasn't shut down in order to stop the CR. And that anger is being aimed at 9 Democratic senators in particular. And so, first of all, because facts matter, only one Senate Democrat actually voted for the Republican-written CR. It was only Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire, who's not running for re-election, who voted for the actual funding law. What the resistance is pissed about is that 9 Democrats voted to allow a vote on the CR in the Senate. And this is because someone filibustered the CR, and I don't know who. But what that means is that 60 votes were needed to break the filibuster to allow a vote on the CR. That's the controversial vote that too many careless journalists are saying was a vote for the CR. It wasn't. But those that voted to break the filibuster did know that once the vote was allowed, the Republicans would have the votes they needed to make it law. And so that's the vote that people are pissed about, the vote allowing the vote. And here's one of the Senate Democrats who is being harassed for his vote to allow a vote, explaining why he did it. Here's Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania. He's the guy, you probably can recognize him, who's constantly wearing sweatshirts and basketball shorts in the Senate. But here he is explaining to reporters in a hallway why this was the wrong fight for the Democrats to pick.
And we've heard Democrats in the House really upset about Schumer's move, the progressive base, also a Democratic base. What do you think it says about the Democratic Party?
I'm terrified to know that they're angry or frustrated. Well, yelling on social media isn't leadership. Okay, I'll be the Democrat that's not going to pander, and I'm going to tell you the truth. And if you think shutting the government is smart, then I thought you're not supposed to get in a war when there's no exit plan. You know, guess what? They're going to realize that the exit ramp is owned by the GOP. We are going to do the things that Musk and Trump can't do, and that's shutting the government down. We will shut it down for them and can only turn it back on only GOP's term, and they have unlimited time to do whatever they want to the government debt. So, like I said, they can yell and fundraise off of that, but I'll be the only Democrat that's going to tell America the truth about shutting the government down, and that would be a disaster, and I'm daring them to keep pushing.
And he's right. During a shutdown, federal employees are effectively classified into essential or non-essential workers, with non-essential employees furloughed and not allowed to work until the shutdown ends. And the person who would get to make those determinations, who is essential, who is non-essential, is the director of the Office of Management and Budget. Here's a reminder. The Office of Management and Budget is the agency that houses the sub-agency that's been renamed DOGE. But equally important, if not more, the guy who's in charge of the Office of Management and Budget right now is Russell Vought, one of the literal authors of the Heritage Foundation document that has so many Democrats freaked out. It's known as Project 2025. Now that document, Project 2025, was not a Trump campaign document and should not have been used as a campaign sledgehammer by the Democrats. I've looked through Project 2025, and nowhere in that document does it suggest that we should take back the Panama Canal or buy Greenland or make Canada the 51st state, and it certainly does not say that we should be slapping indiscriminate blanket high tariffs on our allies. But if you want to look at Project 2025 to understand just one part of the Trump administration right now, you can look at the chapter that was literally written by Russell Vought about what he thinks should be done in the Executive Office of the President of the United States, which is the department he now works in as the head of one of its agencies. And in that document, Russell Vought talks about the necessity of the president to have the, quote, boldness to bend or break the bureaucracy to the presidential will, unquote. And he says, quote, it is the president's agenda that should matter to the departments and agencies that operate under his constitutional authority, unquote. And so according to him, our departments exist to do what Trump wants, not to faithfully execute the laws passed by Congress. That's some king shit. And Russell Vought is clearly a brown-noser to our orange king. And so if there were a shutdown, Russell Vought and likely his subsidiary agency DOGE would be empowered legally to determine what people in our government are essential and need to keep working without pay, and what people are non-essential and who needs to stay home. And that power increases if a shutdown lasts 30 days or longer. Now, let's recall that during the first Trump administration, the government shut down for 35 days because of Trump's border wall hissy fit. And so he's already proven willing to take it that far. Well, after the government is shut down for 30 days, permanent firings become a lot easier and will stand up better in court. Because there are different ways in which agencies can fire people. They can do it during an emergency furlough, like a shutdown. They can do it via a planned long-term furlough lasting more than 30 days, or they can do it via layoffs. But planned long-term furloughs or layoffs trigger a so-called reduction in force procedure, and that requires outlines for who gets fired and why, which are designed to make sure the firings are fair. These procedures have to be publicly published before the firings happen, and so people who are not in the targeted categories, but who get fired anyway, would have documents, public documents, that they could use to challenge their dismissals in court. But current Office of Personnel Management guidance suggests that those procedures would not apply to a shutdown situation that crosses the 30-day threshold. And the truth is that we really don't know the legality of that because we've never experienced it. And so how an agency decides who to furlough during an extended shutdown is still up for debate. But in that legal wiggle room is where I would want to go if I were hell-bent on destroying our government from within and firing a bunch of people in a legal-ish way. People I know I can't fire legally when the government is funded and operational. On top of that, We also need to look at the political reality of this moment where the Republicans are in charge of the House, the Senate, and the White House. Because once the government is shut down for even 1 second, the only thing that could stop us from getting to that 30-day threshold would be reopening the government, which needs to be done via funding bill or a series of funding bills that get passed by both the House and the Senate in identical form and signed by President Trump. Well, the Republicans control both the House and the Senate and therefore get to decide what bills get voted on at all. So what would stop the Republicans from just not creating a bill that reopens the Department of Education? Or not creating a bill that reopens USAID? Or not reopening any other department or agency that they don't like? The answer is nothing. The Republicans have that power right now. And so shutting down the government for even 1 second in this moment in time as a means of fighting Trump is a huge risk, because Democrats risk granting Trump the power to wreck government legally in ways he's attempting to wreck it illegally right now. And so, to take that risk, knowing that there was nothing horrific that needed to be removed from the CR, the Democrats had better have had an important demand. So what exactly were the Democrats demanding? Here's Senator John Hickenlooper of Colorado, who was speaking on a social media post that he posted on March 14th on the Shutdown Showdown Day.
And what I'm asking for is simple. I hope that we can convince the Senate to support a 30-day funding bill and then work together in that 30-day period to solve what's remaining of these budget issues and get to solving the problems facing our country.
That was the big demand. A 30-day CR, extending the deadline again to finish 12 government funding bills that Republicans have shown no interest in finishing. Also, this demand wasn't made in earnest until Friday, March 14th, the day a funding bill had to be signed into law to avert a shutdown. On that day, the House wasn't even in session. So let's say that by some miracle, the Republicans in charge of the Senate decided to pass the Democrats' 30-day CR. Well, that CR would have had to have been passed by the House that same day in order for President Trump to sign it, which is another big if, and avoid a shutdown. But the House was gone. And why were they gone? Well, it's because the Democrats in the House were at a resort. They were at a Democratic Party retreat. And that retreat was pre-planned, obviously, even though we've known since December 20th that the Shutdown Showdown Day was scheduled for March 14th. We've been down this road before. And so a party that intends to wage a real fight would have rescheduled their 3-day resort conference, perhaps to even the following week, when the entire Congress would be out of town for, I don't know, reasons. But the point is that they didn't. The House Democrats knew this deadline was coming on March 14th, and they kept their resort reservations anyway. And let's also take a second to marinate on that schedule. With a full week off already on the calendar from March 17th to the 21st, that would have left only 3 weeks for Congress to finish 12 funding bills that no one is seriously working on and that haven't been finished in the last year and a half. It's absurd. We were just going to end up in the same place just before Easter, or the government would be shut down and Trump and Vought and Musk would be empowered to legally do all the firing they want. It made no sense to risk a shutdown and to risk handing that much power to President Trump for a weak-ass 30-day CR. But the thing is that it didn't have to make sense because the whole fight was fake. The House Democrats were gone. They were at a resort. And even though that resort was only 30 miles away, they did not return on that Friday to even pretend to want to vote on a 30-day CR that they said they were fighting for. It was all a performance. Because the only way House Democrats could be confident enough to keep their resort reservations and be physically away from the Capitol on Friday, March 14th, is if they knew the whole time that the CR that passed the House on March 11th would become law that Friday. If they knew that some Democratic senators would break the filibuster and let it happen. And my favorite Republican in the House, by far, called this whole fake drama out days before it happened. This is the only Republican who voted against the CR in the House of Representatives. Because, as I discovered by actually reading the damn thing, the CR didn't contain the drastic cuts that Democrats said it did. But Tom Massey of Kentucky, he wants those cuts. He's been promised those cuts. And so on Tuesday, March 11th, after the House vote and 4 days before all of the Senate drama, he put this video out on his social media.
Hi, Congressman Massey here. I thought you'd like to know about the fake fight that's going on in the House of Representatives right now over this CR. They're trying to pitch it as a conservative CR versus liberal Democrats, and even the Democrats are going along in the House. But let me tell you why that's a fake fight. They plan to pass it with all Republicans here in the House, but after we leave town, the Democrats are going to vote for it in the Senate. That's right. They're going to need about 8 Democrat senators to vote for this thing over in the Senate. That means that this deal has already been cut, that Mike Johnson has cut a deal with the Senate Democrats, Senate leadership, and even Hakeem Jeffries, he's in on this, so that they can pitch their fake fight here in the House. Now, why am I so certain this is going to pass in the Senate when it gets over there with 8 Democrats, or however many Democrats they need? Well, Mike Johnson is sending us home a day early. We're going to vote on this thing and skip town. If you thought there was really a threat of them not passing it in the Senate, why would you leave town? The other thing that's going on is the Democrats have a retreat, an off-site retreat, where they're going to get together and party and have, guest speakers and stuff. And that starts tomorrow and runs through Thursday and Friday.
He called it. He called it ahead of time. And so, like I said in the beginning of this episode, my goal as a U.S. citizen for the next 4 years, a goal that I think I share with a lot of Americans, is to do something to minimize the damage the Trump administration does to our government. And Democrats have been getting a lot of feedback from their voters who are telling them to do something too. And I understand that. A lot of people are scared right now, and that is both because so much about the Trump administration is truly unprecedented and lawless, but also because the Democrats, for self-serving political reasons, have been purposefully scaring people with exaggerations so wild that I see many of them as lies. And you don't need sound clips. They are doing it constantly with DOJ, treating DOJ like some all-powerful department that we should fear, when the facts are that it is a sub-agency of the OMB with no power whatsoever over the staffing and funding of other departments or agencies. Hell, it doesn't even have authority over its own budget. DOJ gets its money from its parent agency, the OMB. And the Democrats could tell the truth about what DOJ actually is and effectively fight it by removing its public perception of power. But instilling calm in people doesn't fundraise as well. And it certainly doesn't drive people to vote blue no matter who. And the big problem with deceiving people for political gain is that a deceived public will demand actions that make things even worse. And I think that's where we might be headed because of the do-something theater we just witnessed from most of the Democrats. Because like I said, I truly do understand being frustrated that Donald Trump seems to be able to do whatever he wants right now. Although the courts are stepping in, things are stopping. But I do understand wanting the Democrats to do something. I really do. I sympathize with that. I personally want someone to stand in the way of Donald Trump's worst instincts. But if you're going to yell, do something, it does matter what the something is. And so we need to ask ourselves, what goal does the something that we demand serve? Because is the goal to maintain our government as best we can while the wrecking balls are in power? Because if so, not allowing the government to shut down and empowering Donald Trump to shut down departments and never reopen them was absolutely the right move. Or is the goal to fight Trump regardless of the consequences? To fight and look tough, even if that means our government is dismantled even faster, even if it means empowering Trump even more. Like, big picture, is the goal good government or is it politics? Is the goal defending our government from saboteurs on the inside? Or is the goal messaging for Democratic Party campaigns? And what concerns me is that only 9 Senate Democrats chose the preservation of government and are being punished for it by the public. The rest of the party is clearly choosing a political goal. They're choosing theater. They're choosing to ramp up fear in this country. And it's working. And so come September, seeing the mass hysteria over this CR and the anger that the votes to move it forward created, seeing that mass hysteria that the Democrats' own exaggerations and lies have created, Will those 9 Senate Democrats choose to stand up to the party and once again be willing to face down intense pressure from a deceived public in order to do what's right for government? Or next time, will they cave and just do what's popular? Because at some point, a real fight with the Trump administration is probably going to be necessary. Like, even right now, I think we're already in necessary fight territory in regards to customs and immigration, because indefinite detention is happening to innocent people. And in fact, Germany and Britain have just issued warnings to their citizens that entering the United States comes with some scary risks. Because like a Canadian girl was locked up for, I think, 12 days because of some visa confusion. And she was in the middle of trying to buy herself a ticket back to Canada. She wasn't trying to stay here. But the Trump administration didn't just let her fly home, which is the normal process. Instead, they locked her in a cage for almost 2 weeks, and she still doesn't know why. And so I look at this and I'm like, who are we? Like, this is not the United States that I know, and I want to fight to stop this. And so a fight already is necessary. But the Democrats didn't fight to stop that very real problem, did they? Instead, they put on a fake performance in order to get a 30-day CR. You know, a lot of people have been describing the Democrats as feckless lately, which is not a word that I think a lot of us are familiar with. And so I looked it up, and it means lacking the courage to act in any meaningful way. And it does seem to be the perfect word to describe them. But after watching all this unfold, I actually think our problem with the Democrats is even worse than that. Because I think their prioritization of politics over government, their choices to lie instead of inform, now I think the Democrats are doing active harm. Because how will we know the difference in September when the Democrats tell us what's in the funding bill, or when they tell us what's in the reconciliation bill? How can we trust them when they cry wolf like this about a bill that really wasn't that bad? Because when the Republicans do present a bill with drastic cuts or horrific dingleberries, the Democrats will sound exactly the same. This is why I think these performances are dangerous. Because we need truth in these times. We need adults in the room in these times. And we had, thank God, 9 adults who did the right thing on March 14th and averted disaster. And the thing that scares me the most is that they are being punished for it. The public is sending the Democrats the exact wrong message and playing right into Trump's hands, which lately sure seems to be the Democratic Party way. So I would like to give you some good news, at least for Congressional Dish. But since we're in the part of the episode that is mainly listened to by supporters of Congressional Dish, I think you guys would be excited about this. Because C-SPAN just celebrated an anniversary. And so they had myself, Justin Robert Young, and Andrew Heaton on their anniversary special of their podcast, The Weekly. Now, The Weekly is an adorable little podcast, and if you love Congressional Dish, I actually think this is right up your alley. The Weekly is hosted by C-SPAN's communication director, Howard Mortman, who he has been on this show. He was the one who told us all about C-SPAN. He is the nicest man who's ever lived. All of us, we're not wrong, are in love with Howard Mortman. And so he contacted us and asked us to be on that anniversary special of his cute little podcast, which goes back into the archives of C-SPAN. And we'll just tell you about moments in history. And they're not always all that serious. Like, I was in the C-SPAN office one day when Howard was recording an episode about Halloween. So it's cute and it's really fast too. So you have these really long episodes of Congressional Dish, and then you can do like a little cherry on top of The Weekly. Like, they're generally like 15, 20 minutes. They're short. But for their anniversary special, there was a much longer than usual episode in which Howard asked the three of us to provide them our favorite C-SPAN moments. And so the one that I chose was the C-SPAN moment that I was watching in 2011. We've hit the end of the episode, guys. In 2011, I was watching C-SPAN and I saw something that I considered scandalous. And it launched the idea for Congressional Dish. And so you can hear that clip and you can hear about the origin of Congressional Dish by going and checking out that episode of The Weekly. And then, of course, you can hear Justin and Andrew's favorite C-SPAN moments, too. So thank you, Howard, if you're listening, for having us on The Weekly. It truly is an honor to be on your anniversary special. All right. So now let's get over to our executive producers. We have 2 new executive producers, although we have 5 new credits on episodes. So this is very exciting for me. So we have an anonymous executive producer who put his credit on his or her credit. I don't even know who it is, But the credit is on episode 310, Red Flags at Air Traffic Control. So thank you for putting a credit on that episode. I do think that that episode is important for people to understand as we talk about cutting things. Although I will say this, I've been paying very close attention since producing that episode. It wasn't that long ago. It was like January. Since producing that episode, I've been watching the funding about the FAA and all of that. They are not cutting air traffic controllers. There was an email that just like went out to the masses in the federal government, and controllers did get that email basically saying like, you can retire right now if you want to. But there's no cuts happening at air traffic control. I do think that the message has gotten through that we have a shortage of these essential people. And so that's good for now. I can't promise anything. Like, we'll definitely have to keep an eye out for that reconciliation bill. But I think everybody wants our airplanes to stay in the sky. So I'm feeling okay about that situation right now. I'm feeling more than okay about the Craig Brown situation, however, because Craig Brown has been supporting this show for so long. And so he turned in 4 executive producer credits. And that is very cool. And he completely changed the top most valuable episodes situation. So I'll tell you that in a second. But Craig Brown said, he sent in a message. He said, "This is Craig Brown. I've been contributing money towards Congressional Dish since September of 2015. And I've finally gotten around to adding all that up so I can collect a few producer credits. Here's my top picks for most valuable episodes. Congressional Dish 199, Surprise Medical Bills. Congressional Dish 186, National Endowment for Democracy. Congressional Dish 201, WTF is the Federal Reserve. Congressional Dish 156, Sanctions, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. Honorable mention, technically a bonus episode, Becoming Boozeless from February 24. Aw, thank you. Thanks so much for all the hard work over the years. I continue to love the Congressional Dish content and also love the WNR stuff as well." Oh, WNR. There's this thing going on with We're Not Wrong, which he is clearly referring to. And this has been going on before we talked about it publicly. This was a organic situation where when people would abbreviate We're Not Wrong, like in hashtags or in messages to us, instead of it being WNW, because wrong is spelled WRONG, people have been abbreviating it WNR. And so I saw it recently in one of the emails and just couldn't control myself and basically called people dummies at the end of We're Not Wrong. And now I've created a whole thing because more and more people are abbreviating the show to WNR, and I just can't handle it. It's so dumb. And so I do love that Craig is trolling me in this executive producer message. But yeah, I also love those episodes that you picked. And thank you for the bonus on Becoming Boozeless. For those of you that don't know, I quit drinking alcohol in November of 2022. And not because it was like ruining my life, but I just wasn't my best. And so here's the thing. I don't want to get into the whole story, because if you want the whole story, I released an episode called Becoming Boozeless, and it is a public episode. So if you go on Patreon, you don't need to pay to access it. But it's the whole story of how and why I quit. And I can tell you at this point, I'm well over 2 years without alcohol in my body. I'm not sober, but I don't drink alcohol anymore. And I don't think I'll ever drink alcohol ever again. And that was not the intention at first. I was just like, I just don't want to drink for a while. And I gave myself permission. But now I feel so good. I feel like I'm on my game in a way that I haven't been since like middle school. So yeah, I love that you love that episode. But the other ones that you picked, like Surprise Medical Bills, that one saved Congressional Dish listeners a lot of money. What I am happy to tell you is that Congress kind of fixed that one. Now, obviously, health insurance companies, they pay very smart people to help them get around laws. But for right now, the problem that was identified in that episode has actually gotten better. So it is nice to raise the red flag about something and then see it actually get addressed in Congress. It does happen. I also love the National Endowment for Democracy episode. And it's interesting, like I've gotten a lot of feedback when it comes to USAID, because I'll talk about, and I'm not really advocating, I'm just saying that there have been cuts to USAID, and people were like, well, your own show has said that there's sketchy things that happen at USAID. And it's like, well, yeah, there are some parts of USAID that have done some sketchy things, but there's also parts of USAID that like keep people in Africa alive because they were dying of AIDS. There's parts of USAID that feeds millions of human beings. So there's no reason to throw out the entire department because there's parts of it that have done shady things. That's not the case with the National Endowment for Democracy. That thing can be defunded entirely. And I do think it's revealing that that is not on the chopping block. But that thing, I mean, listen to that episode. If you don't know what the National Endowment for Democracy is, it's basically the regime change wing of the State Department. And like, that episode blew my mind. And that thing is consistently funded, including in the CR, because you bet your ass I checked. And then there's the Federal Reserve. Oh my God. That was the episode where I learned that money's not real. That one kind of turned my world upside down. And then the sanctions episode, that's an old episode, but those sanctions are still in place. So even though it's been years, that is still relevant, which is wild. So yeah, Craig, thanks for supporting the show for that long. It's been almost a decade. So very happy to have you on the team. And what your credits did is that did cause a little bit of a shakeup in our most valuable episodes list. Because if you don't know, every executive producer credit on an episode moves it up the most valuable episodes list. And that's where I send all the new people, because we've been doing this now for over 12 years. And so people want to know, like, where do I start? And so I say, you know what? I'm going to let the producers, the people that actually support the show and love the show, like, I shouldn't pick my favorite episodes. You guys should. And so that's exactly what this is. And so the number one most valuable episode remains War Money. That is the story of what Israel is. And that one remains the number one most valuable episode with 7 executive producers. But with Craig's credits, we now have a tie for second. So Contriving January 6th, which is about the January 6th investigation. It's pretty much all a clip show. I love that episode. That one is now tied with WTF is the Federal Reserve with 6 executive producers each. And then number 3 is now National Endowment for Democracy. And then also you moved the sanctions episode onto the front page by adding a 3rd credit onto that one. So yeah, the shakeup is good. And you know what I'm really loving about this system is that I really do think that these executive producer credits are elevating the most valuable episodes to the top of the list, because those episodes being at the top, that works for me. I think that is actually what I would pick. So yeah, I'm loving this system. Thank you for participating in it. And thanks for supporting the show in general. I also want to thank Mike at Pro Podcast Solutions for editing this episode. I want to thank Mark at podcastbranding.co for web design and security. I want to thank my sister Lauren for doing the bookkeeping, and she is our executive producer services specialist. I want to thank my dear old dad, who is the biggest fan and tax dude for Congressional Dish. And I want to thank our guardian angel, Brian Karras. He is our artist who is now watching over us from above. Yeah, we miss you, buddy. And we also miss Claire. This was one episode I had to do without her. And let me tell you, it sucked. Claire, I miss you. I hope you're having a good time with the baby, but I can't wait for you to come back to Congressional Dish. But take your time. I'm doing okay. But yeah, we miss you too. All right. Thanks for listening. I will be back eventually. Until then, support the show on Patreon. You can get the Last Week in Congress episodes. All right. Talk to you later. Bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite the many in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright if the end will justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it lies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. Now we're not keeping quiet.
These
bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems.